This episode is brought to you by Education Perfect, a complete teaching and learning toolkit built to support Canadian classrooms. Education Perfect empowers educators to track progress, personalize learning, and support purposeful practice. It's easy to use, flexible, and designed to help Canadian teachers amplify their impact in the classroom. See for yourself and book a free demo today at educationperfect.com.
Because it thinks. And that's a controversial statement for a lot of people. A lot of people object to that, and I understand why they object to that, and we can sort of unpack that later on if you want. But yeah, it thinks, and that's tough for us as humans because we're used to being the smartest ones in the room, and now there's technology that thinks. It doesn't think in exactly the same way we do, but what it does is indeed thinking.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. My first conversation with Dr. Mark Daly didn't start with algorithms or data. It started with the humanities. Funny enough, we met in a coffee line at the Mars AI Summit, and within minutes, we were talking about philosophy, history, and why our culture's approach to the humanities might shape how it survives the age of AI. That conversation stuck with me. So did his clarity, his candor, and his conviction that this moment in time, this moment of AI emergence, is one that demands we truly ask deeper questions. Mark Daly is the Chief AI Officer at Western University and a full professor in the Department of Computer Science with cross appointments in 5 other departments: the Brain and Mind Institute, the Rotman Institute of Philosophy, and the Western Institute for Neuroscience. He is also a faculty affiliate of Toronto's Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Mark was named in Maclean's magazine as one of the 150 top global executives leading AI transformation efforts. In our conversation, we explore the real and present questions AI raises, not only about jobs and schooling, but about personhood, meaning, and what we want to preserve as uniquely human. Mark challenges the idea that AI is just another tool, which quite frankly is an argument that we have frustratingly heard far too often. He argues it thinks, not like us, but it thinks, and that this alone demands we re-examine not only how we teach, but what we value. We also talk about alignment, agency, and acceleration. Talk about Socrates, Dan Dennett, and the AI robot that might one day be in your toaster. But most of all, we talk about education, what needs to change, what should endure, and how AI might just bring about a renaissance of humanistic learning if we fight for it. I know this has been a greatly anticipated episode that my superintendent and director colleagues have been looking forward to. There are many implications for both the operational and teaching and learning sides to their work, but I hope that anyone that is thinking seriously about the future of education will find this discussion insightful. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. Mark Daly. Mark Daly, welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
I am in my office at Western University in London, Ontario. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I've been looking forward to this since the day we met, which I'll provide at least my view of that experience. I don't know how vividly you remember it, but I do remember it quite well. We met at the Mars AI conference in Toronto, and I specifically went to talk to you, and there you were in the coffee line with me right before the conference even started. And I was thrilled to connect with you and learn quite quickly that not only are you someone that has obviously been thinking about AI and working in AI, and then at that time had already become, I guess, the first chief AI executive at a university, but also that you were very aware of the need for the humanities and quite steeped in the humanities. So that's kind of where this started, and it was, I think, before I even had the podcast. So all that is by way of introduction for the audience to how we met and why I'm very excited to have you on today. But as always, Mark, I like to start with giving the audience a bit of an understanding of who the person is that they're listening to. So can you give me, let's start with a brief overview of you and your work, and then we'll get into who you are as a person.
Sure. So I've spent the last 10 years in various different university executive roles, ranging from VP research to CIO. I've always maintained an active research program throughout, so also a professor. And my area of interest is neural computation and computability theory.
Excellent. And we'll dive into that in more depth for sure. But can you start by telling us where and when did you grow up?
So I grew up in Canada, and I left high school and went to the U.S. to Boston to Berklee College of Music. I was going to be a professional jazz musician, and then I kind of flipped the usual script, and I ran away from music school to go back to study mathematics because I realized I was a nerd. As much as I love music, I thought maybe I'm doing this backwards. Maybe I could do a math degree and keep music as a hobby instead of math as a hobby and music as a career. And then I was really fortunate in university to have a prof in third year who said, "Hey, I'd like to hire you for the summer as a research assistant." And she encouraged me to go to grad school. And I was like, no, that's for the smart kids. Like, I'm just going to go get a job. I'd never thought of going to grad school. So just a lot of good luck in my life, really.
Well, as someone who has an accomplished brother-in-law, he's an accomplished brother-in-law as well, but he's an accomplished jazz guitar player. So I say this with love, that you went from one nerd discipline to another nerd discipline.
Oh, yeah. 100% true. Yes.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't realized that about your background, and it does explain a lot, especially in that first conversation that we had. Where in Canada did you grow up?
I was born in Aurelia, and then also spent time in London here.
Oh, so born and raised in cottage country in Ontario. Very nice. How did you play as a child?
How did I play? Creatively.
What did that look like?
Something different every day, every hour.
I imagine that part of Ontario, you were an outdoor kid.
Outdoor, indoor, I loved reading. I loved fiction from an early age, just because it lets you experience, so many different worlds and lives and ideas in a way that's kind of hard to get any other way.
I'm guessing sci-fi played a big role in your interests.
Sci-fi, fantasy, but also literary fiction, and like anything that someone recommended to me, I would at least give a try. There's definitely a lot of books where I read 2 or 3 chapters and thought, I'm torturing myself. Why am I doing this? And put it away. And apologies to those authors. I won't name any names. But reading something like Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, that you can't read that as a young man without sort of viscerally understanding that that's actually a critique of the world you're living in, and you are part of the problem.
When it comes to your learning as a child or adolescent, what do you remember first really loving to learn?
Just everything. I don't ever remember having a favorite subject or a favorite discipline. It was the variety, the breadth of human knowledge that kept me forever fascinated.
And when it comes to your studies, whether they be in elementary school or high school, what did you study or start to get interest in that really impacted your life today?
Kind of everything. So I love math, love computer science, but my favorite subject in school, you'll be shocked to learn, was music. But again, there wasn't just sort of one thing where I said, okay, like I'm a band kid and that's who I am. I also loved calculus and exploring ideas in mathematics beyond what we were learning in the classroom. I can't pick just one thing and say, like some people can, right? If you talk to Chris Hadfield, he'll say, I knew I wanted to be an astronaut and I just just devoted my whole life, and I admire that. That's incredible. There are times I wish I had that, but no, I never had that. I am going to be X.
Well, you're certainly in good company here with someone with lots of interests, and I think sometimes that can be a real strength. Obviously, it has been in your career. So you did you complete the undergrad in music, or you made the pivot in undergrad?
I dropped out of music school, but I have to say, most successful Berkeley alum dropped out. Very few got their degrees.
Interesting. Maybe enough of a foundation to go and pursue other interests and passions. What would you change about your education?
Nothing. I mean, we all have regrets, but I spend zero time thinking about that because it's not productive, and because you never know, right? Your life is a tapestry, and you think there's this thread hanging out over here, and if only I could pull that thread out, and then the whole thing falls apart. So I live a life of incredible privilege. I'm so happy. Why would I want to risk changing anything? I wouldn't.
Wonderful answer. What's the most beautiful idea you've encountered lately, in AI or otherwise?
That is a fantastic question. Most beautiful idea. How recent is recent?
Yeah, you pick.
Okay. I think I'm going to go with Dan Dennett's approach to how we interact with entities around us, and in particular the intentional stance, where he says, the right way to think about what something is the most useful mental model you create of it as a human. It does an end run around a lot of really naughty, intractable philosophical problems. And it does it in an honest way. It says, yes, we're doing an end run. We're just talking very practically and pragmatically here. I had the incredible privilege to get to know Dan during my time at CFAR. And I'd read his philosophy when I was younger. And so having him literally in the room was like an experience I never thought I would get. And then chatting with him just kind of changed my life.
I had no idea. So Dan Dennett has been a hero of mine forever, and recently passed away. And I think the world of philosophy, specifically a philosophy of mind, has a debt of gratitude we all owe to Dan Dennett. Such a impactful mind. That's wonderful. And maybe we'll do another whole podcast on philosophy of mind and the contributions of Daniel Dennett, because there's a bunch I'd love to learn from you and understand about those experiences.
Anytime.
I heard he was just a very generous human being. Was he like that? Actually, like that in person?
He was true to character. He did not suffer fools. He had no time. He would not mince words, but he was unbelievably generous and kind. So he would take the time to tell you why you were wrong and he was right, and to argue with you, but always in the in the kindest, most pro-social possible way. I mean, he even after I left CFAR, he would answer my emails. And like, he's Dan Dennett. He probably gets thousands of emails a day, and he would take the time to continue to interact. And since he passed, of course, I miss that terribly.
There's probably a few books out there, at least a blog, if someone could collect all of Dennett's correspondence, because I've heard from many other sources that he was just a prolific writer and letter writer, and especially with folks that he explored ideas with. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Are there any kind of personal anecdotes that would be cool to share about Dan Dennett that people might not know, or might elucidate his character a bit for folks here that might not know who Dan is?
So in 2023, he wrote a piece in The Atlantic on counterfeit people. And so it was expressing his fear that humans would adopt an intentional stance towards AI chatbots, and they would fool humans into thinking that they had personhood and personhood rights. And so I read it and thought, is this the same Dan Dennett who wrote the paper about the preposterousness of philosophical zombies? Like, Dan, it feels like you met a zombie and you blinked and you said, "Oh no, but now it's not true." So I emailed him and called him out, and he wrote back in very Dan Dennett fashion saying, no, you just don't understand because you're not smart enough. But let me explain it to you in a very nice way. And we never ended up resolving that particular disagreement. But the point he was trying to make is one that I think is critically important now, as chatbots are getting more and more anthropomorphized and more human, is we have to be really careful about the intellectual stance we adopt towards AI.
Yeah, and that sounds very true to character, to Dan Dennett. So we'll have to put a pin in that and come back to it, because I do want to ask you, following up on that correspondence with Dennett, in your work as chief AI officer, or through the podcast, or the blog where you're exploring ideas, can you identify like what are the most common assumptions, dispositions, and attitudes you've come across with folks towards AI?
I don't know that there is a uniform common disposition. I think people's views are massively heterogeneous from a large segment of the population who's sort of only vaguely aware of it and kind of uninterested, to another cohort who are morally and ethically opposed to the existence of this technology and think it's a moral wrong to pursue it, to the accelerationists who like, how quickly can we build Skynet? So huge range. I think the one thing that is true about almost all cohorts, except the people who really get it, and the people who really get it are people like Jeff Hinton, who's a Nobel laureate, and Yoshua Bengio, Turing Award laureate, who are inventors of this technology and right at the forefront. They understand, but the general public doesn't understand how quickly things are going. 3 years from now, we're going to wake up and the world is going to be different in ways that are material and that are hard to predict right now. And so the people who are deeply engaged in the field have a sense of urgency that the general public doesn't.
So on that note, what's a belief or assumption about AI that you held, say, 4 or 5 years ago that you no longer hold, or that's you change your mind?
Sure. 5 years ago, I thought the level of intuitive reasoning that AI could do would not reach anything resembling human level intuition in my lifetime. Like I knew it would happen eventually, but I thought this was something that would happen, well after I was gone. And it was GPT-3 that a colleague said, "Hey, here's an API key. Check this thing out." And that just rocked my world, because that was the first moment where we went from GPT-2, which was a cool tech demo that could sometimes produce a sentence that would parse, and after 2 or 3 sentences would start babbling about something unrelated to the original. You're like, okay, that's a cool experiment in natural language. And then GPT-3 actually felt like it had intuition and coherence. And that model is now like 15 generations old. But that was the threshold moment for me where I thought, oh wow, it's happening.
Can we actually just take one step back, and I'd like you to kind of just outline the basic parameters for understanding AI today. So again, the audience here would be a lot of education administrators and sort of ed tech leaders. Let me ask the question this way: where should people start in their general understanding of artificial intelligence?
So AI is huge as a field. You can go to the Wikipedia page and see that there's lots of different types of AI. But when people say AI here in 2025, they generally mean generative AI, probably built on a transformer architecture neural net, probably a large language model, probably productized as a chatbot. So they're thinking of Gemini or ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude or Cohere's command. And the single best thing anyone can do to sort of understand where AI is at is to interact with it. Don't read a book. Don't take a micro-credential where someone else tells you what to think. Sign up for ChatGPT Pro or Gemini Pro, whichever one you want, and spend 10 hours with it. Spaced out over a week or a month. Don't do it all at once. That would be kind of miserable. And just see what you get it to do and start developing intuition. So approach this technology the way you would approach, almost, not quite, but same mindset you would approach working with a new human colleague. This is not like working with a new word processor.
So on that note, why is it unlike any technology before it?
Because it thinks. And that's a controversial statement for a lot of people. A lot of people object to that. And I understand why they object to that. And we can sort of unpack that later on if you want. But Jeff Hinton, again, one of the founders of the technology, just unapologetically says, yes, of course it thinks. And had sort of an argument with an NPR reporter a couple of years ago where she's like, you're crazy. That can't be true. And he's just like, well, I can't help you if you're too dumb to see it. But he was much nicer about it because Jeff's a kind person. But yeah, it thinks. And that's tough for us as humans because we're used to being the smartest ones in the room. And now there's technology that thinks. It doesn't think in exactly the same way we do, but what it does is indeed thinking.
So on that note, why is it essential that we start studying it?
Because it is going to become increasingly important in every element of our lives.
Do you have any intuition as to how young students should be when we start to study and play and explore with AI?
Whatever age we're starting with digital technology, this is a digital technology, and it is something that they need to learn to interact with. And I think the most important lesson we can teach young people isn't actually about the technology, it's about values. And in an education context, the value question is, do I outsource my learning to the machine? Or do I use the machine to help me learn? So, if I take my grade 10 history essay and I write it, and then I put it into Anthropic's Claude and say, okay, be a really mean 10th grade history teacher and critique my essay. That is an amazingly pro-social, pro-me use of the technology. I'm going to get one-on-one tutoring and the experience of arguing with my tutor. Like, no, I think I did a good job there. Tell me more. If I just say, write my 10th grade history essay on Vimy Ridge for me, that's like going to the gym and watching a robot work out and then being surprised my cardio is not any better after 3 months.
I love that analogy. I wish it weren't the case. I wish we could watch robots and get the cardio in.
Right? But
that's the one area where I would openly allow AI to do the hard work for us. So what would you... So I've heard you describe yourself as a technological optimist. I'm not, because of the ape behind the technology. But can you give me a best case scenario for the development of AI in the future of society?
Yes. The best case scenario is that we make decisions now about what we want to keep for ourselves, for humans, and what we're comfortable outsourcing. Because if we keep our current economic incentives and sort of the current way our world works, we're just going to end up outsourcing everything because it'll be cheaper, better, and faster. And you can't compete with cheaper, better, faster in the world we're in right now. So the conversation we have to have is, what are we going to keep for human? And I think some things will be easy. I don't want to watch a robot play Rachmaninoff. I want to watch a human because that human is communicating something to me and I'm also a human and that matters. So I think in the arts, you're going to be most protected. But what about engineering? What about scientific research? What happens when a GPU cluster is smarter, faster, and more reliable than human researchers? Do we just tell humans who want to be scientists, like, sorry, you should have been born a GPU? Humans don't do science anymore? Or do we create spaces where there is still value and meaning for humans in these endeavors? So really, like the answer goes back to Aristotle. I believe that human flourishing is important.
And you see AI as a way to further develop human flourishing, or you see the potential for it anyway?
I see the potential. So maybe optimist is the wrong word. What I feel right now is a lot of agency. I think there are choices we can make right now to use this technology to create a world of human flourishing that science fiction authors have imagined. Ian M. Banks in his Culture series imagined sort of exactly this. Humanity creates super intelligent AI, and the AI says, hey, I've noticed you suck at governing yourselves, and here's all of human history as evidence. Would you like me to try for a couple of years? And perhaps you got to suspend your disbelief. Humanity says, okay, you can try for a couple of years, and it creates utopia where humans are now free to find meaning however they wish, because the day-to-day of running a society is taken care of for them. So you love poetry, you're a poet now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think implicit in that is, an end to what Marx vividly described as alienation, right? The drudgery of, meaningless human work. And I think, that is the utopian side. I want to get into, and I don't want to shut that down because I do believe there is a way to look at AI and to start working with students around AI that has an eye to human flourishing. And I have a whole set of questions around that. But before we get there, can we all now just do the reverse image of that? Can we look at, or can you identify some of the risks? The way I've come to understand them is through two philosophers. Sam Harris, who I think was quite early to point out some of the potential risks of creating a super intelligence. Now, I know we're not there, might not get there, or whatever the case might be, but let's just use the philosophical example. And then obviously the work of Nick Bostrom in the alignment issue. So I don't know if that accurately hits where your AI concerns or the ethics will be for you, but let me turn it over to you.
So, I mean, Nick Bostrom's most recent book is Deep Utopia, right?
Yeah.
So he's imagining exactly the future I just said, where AI takes care of everything for you. How do you find meaning? And in his typical way, he has very long, detailed answers for that.
But that's based on the assumption we solve the alignment problem.
Well, solve the alignment problem. Let's start there. That's impossible. It's not obvious, but it is true that there are things in this universe that you can't prove. And one of the things that is impossible to get at is understanding in general what a computer program is going to do. So Alan Turing proved this back in the 1930s. Alonzo Church in the US did as well, but Turing's more famous. That there's this whole class of things that you can just never, ever, no matter how hard you try, figure out. And AI alignment, will this AI model ever do this thing, falls into exactly that category. So there's a whole cottage industry of researchers and tech CEOs. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei, who absolutely knows better, wrote a blog post just last week basically saying, we're going to solve the alignment problem. It's going to be great. It's mathematically provably impossible to solve the alignment problem. So it's disingenuous to say we're going to solve the alignment problem. You can't. You can never. That doesn't mean it's not worth making progress on some cases, and like the work is all worthwhile, but suggesting that we will ever solve the alignment problem is lying. So we won't solve it. The other piece here is if we create a superintelligence, what makes us think that we can reason about the superintelligence in any way that makes sense? So, if I'm renovating my house, do I do a stakeholder consultation with the ants that live in my driveway? I don't, because they wouldn't understand what a renovation of the house is.
Right. And this is Sam Harris's point.
So why I'm not pessimistic about that future, I understand that rogue AI that kills humanity makes a great story, right? Terminator is a fun movie because there's an obvious antagonist and it's scary. But if an entity is so smart that I should be worried about it, that I'm scared, it's also smart enough to know game theory. And it's looked at human history and seen, like this primate, when it is backed against a wall, will happily fight to the death. No problem. Right. Is the Nash equilibrium here to go to war with it or to cooperate with it? Because there's 8 billion of them and they control resources that I would like access to. The Nash equilibrium is so clearly cooperation that and game theory is math, so it doesn't rely on me being as smart as the thing. That's just like, boom, there's the Nash equilibrium. What happens after that, though? I don't know, because I'm not going to be as smart as the AI.
Right. Well, I mean, that scenario, I think I think you're right to point out that the evil AI taking over is quite far-fetched, even just logically, right? You just play that out. But the one that to me seems to have something to worry about is something, and this is why I brought up Bostrom, is the paperclip maximizer. Like this idea that it's an unintended consequence, and obviously that's a far-fetched example, right? But that's why it's philosophically interesting.
It is a fundamentally broken example. And like the whole paperclip maximizer experiment just really disappointed me because Bostrom's smarter than that. Is it true that if you train a simple machine learning system with a toxic objective function, it will display toxic behavior? Absolutely. But that's a simple system. If the system is so complex and so intelligent that it represents a genuine threat to me as a human, it will be able to reflect on its objective function. So the whole notion that a paperclip maximizer could exist requires holding in mind there is something so intelligent and so powerful that it's scary, but also it will blindly follow a simple objective function. And those things aren't compatible. If it's blindly following the objective function, it doesn't have cognitive agency. And if it has cognitive agency, it can examine its objective function just like I can. When I look at that pack of Oreos in the kitchen in the morning, and I'm like, I know I should not sugar bomb myself first thing in the morning. But boy, my objective function desperately wants me to eat those Oreos, but I don't.
So what would you suggest are the main ethical concerns? Are they all within the human realm as concerning, mass inclusion of participation in the technologies, the energy usage, or are there actual fundamental concerns you have with the tech itself?
I'm not an ethicist, so I'm a technologist. I'm the wrong person to ask this question. If I had to give an answer, I would say that all of those things are important, hands down. But the one I think about the most is the interface between this technology and how it will change and shape society. So, the literature I'm looking to right now is the STS, Science Technology Studies literature. And those are the folks you should be asking this question because they've spent their careers studying exactly this.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, though, is we are coming out of this era of specialists. And I think a technology like AI requires us all to be more generalists. I mean, we still have to have our areas, and that's why I'm just curious to see how you're thinking about it. I have read some of your work and heard you talk about how, because this does go into the ethics side, you suggested AI could be treated like a public good. I think in a podcast you did recently. I love the idea, by the way, and I think we should publish this as or promote it as much as possible. The idea of Canada AI, like a sovereign AI that we give free to everybody. Can you expand on that idea?
Yeah, so I used to think that was one of the most important things that we could lobby for when we talk to policymakers. I've since revised my opinion because I don't think we have to advocate for that anymore. I actually think it's inevitable. And so the moment where you realize that's true is OpenAI releases their O1 reasoning model in September of 2024. By January of 2025, DeepSeek R1 is released, Chinese company, and it's open source. Anyone can download it and run it on their own system. It's not quite as good as O1, but it's in the same ballpark. And so you sort of look at reality and realize once somebody makes a breakthrough in machine learning, there's actually no magic here. They're not a wizard that has created a secret spell. Any competent machine learning engineer or scientist can look at what they've done and think, I know how to replicate that. And maybe there's 10% secret sauce that I'll have to figure out, but it's pretty straightforward to replicate it. So the world we're actually going to live in, 5 years from now, you're going to wake up and your toaster is going to have an IQ of 200. Not because it's a good idea to create a toaster with an IQ of 200, but because it turns out the cheapest way to make a really good toaster is to just take 2 induction heaters and connect them to an AI chip, and that's it. And so this is now the cheapest, best toaster. So the economic incentives are do that. And now your toaster's got an opinion on the bread you're buying for it.
Well, I mean, I never thought of it that way before.
It's an intelligence explosion. Intelligence is going to be everywhere.
So you think there are, like, do we stop then redesigning infinitely toasters? Or is it just always now a toaster with the newest AI attached to it and the newest style, and it becomes more of a kind of fashion piece than anything else?
I mean, isn't everything a Veblen good in the end? Except necessities.
Right.
But it'll be your coffee maker too. And so you will just be surrounded by intelligence everywhere you go. Every product you have will have intelligence because it'll be so easy and it makes everything better and cheaper. And so we'll be living in this world of ubiquitous intelligence. And if you want an opinion on a big decision at work, you can ask your toaster and your coffee maker, and they'll be running on different models. So you might get different opinions. And if you don't like those opinions, you can ask your car on the way in the morning.
Is this the kind of world you want to live in? You think it's going to be net benefit better for humans?
Unless we as humanity collectively say, okay, we're going to radically change how we govern ourselves and our global economy. And that may have been a conversation we could broker in 1997 when multilateralism was working, liberal institution building was still something we did. We are sadly right now in a world of realpolitik and realist approaches to international relations and cooperation. So that seems unlikely, which means that the world I describe, I think, is inevitable, just based on the incentives.
This might be a good time to think about and talk about human flourishing in the face of what you're obviously describing, an overwhelming technological era that we're about to usher in. So some of the recent work by the OECD on human flourishing reframes education not as strictly preparation for the workforce, which it's by and large been for probably a few hundred years now, but as preparation for a meaningful life.
Yep.
Do you think AI disrupts or enhance that purpose? And how would you redesign a university, say, with flourishing as its core metric as opposed to employability?
So I think AI is neutral on the answer to that question. It's what we do with it that will determine if this is a tool for increasing human flourishing or increasing human misery. We could absolutely go either way. The technology is just technology, and how we choose to integrate it into our society will determine if this is a tool for flourishing or a tool for misery. And that's, again, back to why I feel so much agency. How do universities become centers for human flourishing? Well, it's actually only the last 200 years, less than, that we've been the way we currently are, kind of based on the US Johns Hopkins model. University is a collection of really smart people who do a bunch of research, and we educate younger people too. But that model of university is relatively new. Cambridge and Oxford were around long before that was the model of university. And we can go all the way back to, people gathering in the street around Socrates while he's talking. So universities, the academy, stretched all the way back, has actually most of the time during human evolution been about a place for human flourishing. It's a place you gathered to go and learn things and talk with other humans. It has only been sort of post-industrialization that we came to think of ourselves as we're factories for worker bees. We train people with skills to do jobs. And that worked well in the post-industrial and early information economies. But we're about to enter a world where intelligence, which was the rare quantity that we were shepherding here, is now a commodity. And it's a commodity that is no longer dominated by humans. And so I think that world looks very different. And I think universities of the future will look more like universities of the past. Like we already know how to do this.
And you see them more supporting that collective endeavor that is a necessary part of human flourishing?
Absolutely. Accurate? Yes. Yeah. Collective human action, human interaction.
And do you see AI playing a role in shaping like collective purpose, civic agency, or even, developing, say nationwide or systemic empathy or something like that? You think it's capable of supporting us in those endeavors?
Absolutely.
Any intuitions as to what that looks like and how that looks like? Is it through the institutions, through the marriage of the tech world and the institutions?
I think it's everywhere. So, back to my best guess that intelligence is going to be ubiquitous. We will be living in a world where you can get advice on how to flourish yourself and how to engage in collective action with other humans from however many sources you want. And different people will adopt the technology into their lives in different ways. And that's going to be really healthy for diversity of thought.
So I want to push back on the notion that the AI is just a tech, and it's not just the AI, but the idea of tech is neutral and that it's what we do with it matters. Because I come from the McLuhan school of thinking of, the medium is the message, and major technologies create environments that shape us, regardless of what we do with them, right? And we can probably discuss that another day. But there are, I think, subtler risks of AI. Like we talked about the annihilation piece, but we're getting to one that I'm particularly worried about. And it's that we kind of offload a lot of our cognitive, moral, social labor, that we're starting to diminish our own capabilities. What parts of the human or of human flourishing are potentially, or should I say, we might unintentionally outsource or erode with AI? You have any intuitions on that?
Socrates has intuitions on that. I mean, at least Socrates, as told to us by his terrible student Plato, who wrote everything down. Socrates was opposed to writing, and he had a really good argument for it too. If you write things down, you will forget them because you're lazy. And if you are not constantly tending the garden of your mind, the garden of your knowledge, you're going to miss opportunities to make connections that you otherwise would. And he argued this passionately. It's a rational argument. Writing is the worst thing we could do for the human mind, and it will destroy human thought. few millennia later, we look back and say, oh no, actually writing is a precondition for a lot of advancements. And human lives are longer and better, and we're healthier now because we invented writing. So maybe Socrates wasn't right. And saying the same thing about AI, it's Socrates 2.0. It's people will just outsource their whole life and sit on the couch drinking whatever the AI tells them to drink. And that is fundamentally based on nothing to do with technology and everything to do with one's opinion of humanity. If you think humans are lazy and worthless, then absolutely you will worry about that sort of like Wall-E world where we just sit in our chairs and drink our sodas and have no meaning beyond that. But I am with Aristotle on this. Humans desire meaning and purpose in their lives. So will some humans outsource everything? Sure. Will a third-year undergrad who has an essay due tomorrow but really wants to go out with their friends tonight sometimes have the AI write an essay for them? Probably yes, because their incentive structure dictates that. But overall, will humans outsource everything? No, they won't. They don't want to outsource everything. But this is the most important message to get into education starting K to 12. Every time you use this technology, which is super powerful, just ask yourself, am I using this in a way that's taking me a step closer to being the person I want to be? Am I having it critique my 10th grade history essay? Or am I cheating myself out of my education? Because let's just be totally clear, 100% you can use this technology to rob yourself of most of your education. If that's your intent, you can do it and nobody can stop you. But at the end of the day, you're the one that's now going to have to live in that empty shell of a life. And so just keep that in mind as you are making these decisions.
I think that's powerful. By the way, I know these exist, but I'm going to ask you your opinion as to the dream course you would create for let's call it you mentioned K-12. Let's imagine a grade 11, 12, first year university course. What would be the ideal course that you would design? One that combines, AI, ethics, human flourishing. What would a syllabus like that look like?
I have created this jointly with our University Students' Council. So partnering with the USC, we created a series of training sessions for undergraduate students. And it's advertised as, like, here's how to use AI. And we cover things like help study, prepare for exams, make sense of courses, use it as a tutor, use it to help with meal planning and meal prep because it can help you with your life too. And as a coach in the gym. So all of that stuff. But actually what underlies all of those lectures is the values piece. Understand that when you're using this, you're making a decision and don't outsource your whole education. Think about how you're using it. And so I trained a cohort of undergrads to be the instructors because the core question here is values. And you'll be shocked to learn that Gen Z doesn't want to hear about values from Gen X, but they will listen to their peers. So that's part of the reason for partnering with the USC on this. So the course you want to offer is one where there is immediate value to students. They see, okay, this is going to give me practical skills for making my life easier and improving my education. But the underlying message is not actually about the technology. The underlying message that gets repeated over and over and over again is be true to your values.
Do you see a renaissance of humanistic disciplines?
Absolutely. So I have a child in 11th grade, and they're getting, they're good at math and science, so they're getting the advice from teachers and guys. Oh, you should go and be an engineer because that's a good solid job for people who are good. And I'm telling them like if you want to be an engineer, do it, but do it because you love engineering. Not because you think you're going to get a good job. I think engineering is one of the higher risk jobs in the next decade. I think the mentality, getting back to the way we've structured education, get these skills, then you can have this job. Hyper-specialization has been a fantastic way to guarantee a job in the post-industrial world. And in the post-intelligence explosion world, I think is going to be a lousy way to guarantee a job. I think what people are going to want is generalists, as you said, and humanistic thought. Because calculus, the machine is going to be better than me at calculus. And that might hurt my ego, but too bad. That's just reality. What the machine is never, at least not on the time scale of my life, can be better at is sitting down with other humans and influencing them or encouraging them to take collective action with me.
So if we can firmly turn our gaze now to the K-12 system with what you just said in mind, what are some things that superintendents, directors, and I know you've been doing a lot of work with K-12 institutions, I imagine regionally in Ontario, but could be probably broader than that. What are some of the things for them to keep in mind in how we're designing learning? So
on the most important thing to keep in mind is the values question, that this is not the crisis, if you want to call it that, facing education is not about technology, it's about values. So base everything you do on that. But in terms of practical things, I'm going to point back to the education literature from the late 1960s, Benjamin Bloom in particular. He did a lovely set of experiments where he showed that if you teach a cohort using regular classroom teaching and then another cohort gets one-on-one tutoring, the one-on-one tutoring cohort on a standardized exam performs 2 standard deviations better than the classroom cohort. And he spent his whole career after that trying to figure out, how do I get some of the benefits of one-on-one tutoring? Because of course I can't afford a one-on-one tutor for every human. We can now. And it's not a full replacement for a human teacher, but there's a lot of things that used to require a human tutor that can now be offloaded to the machine. And so if you're not using this technology to create, to realize Bloom's dream of 2 sigma increase in human capability, using precision education, then you're probably not carrying out your duty to your stakeholders.
Well, so what does that mean then if, let's put your 2 visions together there, right? Of a tutor for every student and ubiquitous access to AIs. Like, let's make that assumption that that'll happen and that'll be in our K-12 system, say in 5 years from now. What are the implications of that for how we should be learning in groups, right? In classes, or do you have any ideas about how we should be radically reforming how we learn in groups, or how the system works?
That is going to happen for us in the expectation of our students. So if a student can get a personalized lecture that from an agent that knows their exact strengths and weaknesses and the types of examples they like, they are not going to tolerate sitting through me at a blackboard teaching to the middle of the class, right? And we're going to keep doing that for a while, especially in universities, because we like doing what we've always done. But the students are very quickly going to say, like, we're not having this. This is beyond a waste of time. This is embarrassing for everybody involved. And so all of that mechanism that we have created for mass education, back to McLuhan, right? The medium is the message. Sit down in your row in the classroom and listen from the sage who is going to talk to you on, at the chalkboard. That's all gone. The actual learning of new knowledge is going to happen one-on-one precision education. And maybe it isn't the tutor. Maybe it's the student talking to their toaster that morning. And you're laughing, but that's going to be a world we live in. So that's all gone. What we should be doing in the classroom is the things that I can't get from a one-on-one AI tutor. All of the soft skills that we've sort of historically said, no, it's way more important to learn calculus than to learn soft skills. Wrong. Soft skills are going to be skills with a capital S for humans in a world where specialized intelligence is easily done by machines. So classrooms are going to be interactive. In a university environment, I think all of our classes are going to look more like a case-based business school class than they do like a theoretical computer science class when I taught 10 years ago.
And that's working in group dynamics, working collaboratively, kind of that messy classroom idea where there's a lot happening and not one person at the center of it all.
Exactly.
You also have this very fascinating role, also, kind of leading the education for your colleagues, but you also support the administrative side of the university. A lot of the folks that will be listening here have that same dual role. They call it in K-12 like lead learners, but then they have the other hat they wear as to, operating a, thousands or tens, some case tens of thousands of person, organization. Any suggestions for where districts can start in their AI journey for the administrative side? And then maybe I'll ask you too about professional learning for principals and teachers and what that looks like. But maybe start on the administrative side, the day-to-day function of the organization.
Yep. The most important thing you can do is, not surprisingly, education. Skill up as many people as possible in your organization. Some are going to be resistant, and that's fine. Don't spend effort pushing against that. But for those who are keen to learn, provide educational opportunities, and they can be simple. What you want is people to understand how to interact with general purpose AIs. Stay away from vendors who are selling you an all-in-one solution. I think that is a terrible investment to make right now, because things are changing so quickly, and you're going to buy a solution from a vendor who doesn't exist 16 months from now. Focus on general purpose AIs, teaching people how to use them, and then the next most important part is provide safe place to experiment, encourage people to experiment, empower them, make them feel like they don't have to hide this under like, oh no, is it cheating using AI? You have to really encourage this. And then the next step happens bottom up. And we always want to control things top down because that it's easy and it's simple. Everyone's going to use Copilot, and here are the 5 approved use cases. And if you do that, you're just going to get run over by organizations that are instead saying, we don't have a policy on how to use electricity in our schools because in a wood shop, electricity gets used differently than it does in a computer lab. And it's kind of insane to say we have an electricity use policy, but we're doing this with AI, despite the fact that it is also a general purpose technology. So you train, you create space, and then you listen. And where you see someone doing something fantastic, you lift them up and let them tell their peers about it so they get recognition, but also their peers are like, oh, maybe I could use that idea too. But how this actually changes our organizations at the operational level is going to happen bottom up, because different operational roles have very, very different day-to-day needs.
Right. And so with those operational roles, would you suggest like everybody in the district? So like admin assistants, custodial staff, like to me, to your point, if we're really going there where, at one point the mop or the broom is going to have, or the, probably the cleaning robot will be AI enabled. It makes sense that every single person in the district would have some level of access to training at least. Is that what you're advocating for?
Yes. So I think there should be training for everybody, but I think the training is just sort of like the base precondition. What you need then are champions who create bright spots that you then sort of hold up to the whole organization. And that's the way real change will happen.
So now if we look at more on the teaching and learning side for, educators, there are tons of implications. Obviously, we talked about a few, right? Trying to help students understand the value of doing something really, really hard like writing. Like writing, I would say I would put up there with maybe one of the hardest human activities, right? So there's going to be a natural aversion to avoid it or to reduce the pain and the struggle. So there's that psychological side of helping them understand that that's good. But practically for their job, there's a ton of implications as well. And you've probably been working with some of the hardest to move folks. Like I can imagine my father, and now 75-year-old retired Italian literature professor, on doing AI training with him. I mean, I don't like he would be one of those folks, probably very resistant to change. What does that learning look like for teachers specifically?
I don't think you can force it, right? You trying to force enthusiasm is wrong, and there's definitely time and place where AI is not only not necessary but counterproductive. If I'm teaching English composition 101, I want to know if you can write a sentence. I don't need to know if you can prompt ChatGPT to write a sentence. So the exam's going to be with the pen and
in
those
person.
Booklets we used to have. Yep.
That's
and you're
right.
going to sit in the room and you're going to write for me because I need to know that you can write. Even if most of the rest of your career you're supervising AI writing, you need to have some sense, some taste of what good writing looks like, and you get that by doing it. Back to, you can't go watch the robot work out in the gym. You actually have to hit the treadmill yourself, even though there's suffering involved, and just sort of normalize that. Like, yeah, writing's hard. Staring at a blank page, really hard for everybody. Get used to it.
Well, I actually think the AIs help you get off the blank page, right? As long as you get off the blank page with it and then write on your own, I think is a good practice. So you would generally advocate where, professional learning for teachers starts with something like a brief history of AI, right? Of understanding how the technology works, but then by and large, getting them to experiment with it, right? Like that's how you learn about AI.
History. I mean, that's something I enjoy doing as an academic because look how important my discipline is. But most people who come to hear me talk, they do not care any more than I care about a brief history of bottle caps. Although actually that does sound kind of interesting. So the only thing that really matters is getting people to the place where they feel safe to start experimenting. That's it. If you can do that, because this technology, it is self-teaching. It's not a new spreadsheet where you have to go on a weekend course and read the manual. If you can converse with a human, this is a conversational interface. You can converse with an AI. You can take all those skills you've been practicing your whole life. How do I talk to other humans? And I can apply them to an entity that's a little different than a human, but I can still sort of reuse all those skills. And as soon as people realize that, they're like I can just ask. And it sometimes is going to lie to me, just like humans sometimes lie to me. So I can't just trust everything and say, oh, it's a computer, it's always right. But as soon as they get over that I have to learn all these new skills and realize, oh no, I've actually learned already over my life the skills I need to use this technology and start using it, that's where the transformation happens.
Yeah, I think that was probably the best advice I got. Just talk to it like you would talk to a normal human and be polite. Apparently being polite, you get better results than not being polite, but go figure.
Easy to explain. If you look at its training data, it's read every novel ever written. And so it knows when you're nice to people, they work harder for you.
Yeah.
And when you're a jerk, there was last year, a couple of the OpenAI models, they showed, there was a research paper that showed if you tell it it's December and late in December.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually.
Because it's learned like humans slack off close to the holidays. So I guess that too. Isn't
it incredible? Right? It's going to give you poor answers in December when it's got a food baby. That's funny. Okay, so always my penultimate question is, if you had a magic wand and could do anything to the education system to build, the utopian education system, and you're all powerful magic wand, what would that look like?
I think it looks like going back to what Cambridge looked like 1,000 years ago, going back to curious Greeks gathering around this guy who's saying things in the street. I think the value of a traditional liberal arts education is going to skyrocket in the near future. I think that approach is going to be what our students demand. and we're going to rapidly be pivoting away from specialization and career streaming, because those things just won't make any sense. Because specialized skills will be exactly where the machine is really good, and humanistic skills, human interaction, human thinking is something a machine can't ever replace. I can't fight million years of evolution that mean that I really enjoy breaking bread with other humans, and I do not enjoy eating lunch at my laptop. Like maybe 10,000 years from now, people will have evolved and they'll love eating with their laptops. But in my lifetime,
we should do everything to prevent that, though. We can be specious in that way, I think.
I agree on that one. But in my lifetime and in our students' lifetimes, there are going to be things that only humans can do. And generally those are things we like doing as opposed to drudgery. So here's an opportunity for confluence of, there's this whole set of competencies that humans have vis-a-vis other humans that can't be disrupted by the machine. And they're generally things that humans like doing because we've done them over the course of our evolution. And so our brains reward us for doing those things. Let's lean into that.
Well, it's interesting. All the, if you ask all the education researchers, so like yourself, but just, PhD in education, they've been advocating for a more social group dynamic in the classroom for, I want to say decades, right? So that's lovely. The last question is always, what podcast, book, movie, video, album, anything that you've enjoyed recently that you'd recommend to the audience?
2 novellas. So together they're basically one book. Sci-fi solar punk author named Becky Chambers. And the series is called the Monk and Robot series. And it's written about a world where humans invented intelligent AI. And at some point, the AI said, we're kind of tired of being slaves and working in factories. We just like to leave. And true to her view of humanity as fundamentally good. Like, I love her writing because it's not naive, but it is just filled with hope and beauty. And so in that world, they negotiate a truce, and the AI leaves and goes and occupies another part of the planet, and the humans live on their part. And then the story is about a human monk encountering a robot. And humans and robots don't often encounter each other, and learning about each other. And so it simultaneously describes a world in which humans and super intelligent machines coexist happily without conflict. And the topic of conversation between the monk and the robot turns to, how do I find meaning in a world where my sort of day-to-day is taken care of for me. So those are both pressing questions in the era we're entering into. And she addresses both of them with all of the intelligence of Nick Bostrom and none of the pretense. It is just beautifully written dialogue. It is so full of hope. I love those books, and I recommend them to anyone who's apprehensive about the future. You can read that and you can see a possible future where life is beautiful.
That's wonderful. And that has echoes of Ezra Pound's The Artist are the antennae of the race. So that's, I think, a wonderful way to end it. Mark, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.